A few months after my mother passed away, my sister and I were on the phone. During a pause in our conversation, my sister said, "Yarona, do you realize we're orphans now?" I understood what she meant. I couldn't just call my mother randomly and ask for a recipe I had lost. I couldn't call my father and get his recent take on the political landscape. Our tangible link to our parents was severed. But the thing is that, for me, they still lived in my heart. A few years later, when I was 5 months pregnant, my husband and I decided to take a little vacation. And there was a moment in the car when I turned to him and I said, oh, I have to call my mother and let her know we landed in Arizona. My stomach dropped. I lost my breath. My heart skipped a beat. Because again, my parents, see, they lived in my heart. And so for me, they didn't leave. They were still with me. I believe that when we build a strong parent-child relationship, the whole sum of who they were to us, not just the role they played, remains with us forever. And so today, I'd like to share with you lessons that I have learned through love, loss, and living, as well as my background, my professional field in the field of early childhood development and human development. And with these lessons, I believe that we will gain the blueprint to change the way we raise our children. My apologies, I rewrote some things. Over 15 years, hang on one second. Apparently it doesn't like me right now. Okay. Over 15 years in the field of early childhood development, I learned something very critical. Parenting is one of the most important jobs a person may ever have. Oddly though, there is not one child that I know of that has been born with their own user-specific manual. I don't know, right? My sister and I joke about that all the time. The thing is, there's also no society that requires people to read a book or take a basic child development class to learn how to be a stable, healthy parent before they ever actually become one. Why is that? Why in our school systems do we learn about biology, chemistry, math, reading and writing? In a lot of school systems, we even learn about reproduction and psychology. But no system that I've ever known teaches us about the basics of human development. So if I was to ask you guys here right now, could any of you name the 5 domains of early child development?
No.
Yes?
No.
No? Oh, darn, I was really hoping. See, here's the thing. I've met 2 kinds of people who usually know about child development. People who are in a professional field or related field, or parents who've had to learn really quickly when their child showed signs of a developmental delay or disability. My belief, it is my belief, and really the thing that I want to get across to everybody, is that it is an imperative that we bring in the learning about human development in our school systems. And when we do that, we will start to raise people who, even if they go on not to have children, will have an understanding about the why behind what people do what they do. So I'd like to do a little review with you guys. There are 5 domains of early childhood development. So the first domain, which oftentimes when parents would come into my system, is these are 2 things that would be the first things they would say. My child's not walking, my child's not talking. Okay, understandable. Motor skills, we've got gross motor skills and fine motor skills. That's walking, hand-eye coordination, and so on. Then we've got our language skills. Now, language, interestingly, communication, a lot of people don't realize this, but when babies are first born, they don't come out talking. I'm pretty sure you all know that. So we have receptive language skills, receptive communication skills, and we have expressive communication skills. So receptive is all about what you understand, your comprehension of what someone else is communicating to you. And expressive is what you speak outward, how you go. But the thing is that a lot of people don't understand that it's not the words that start first. There are nonverbal cues and gestures, and we have to pay attention to that. Now we've got cognition as well. Now cognition is not exactly the same thing as intelligence. Cognition is about the process, the mental action that's happening in the brain that helps people process what's going on in their environment through their experiences and the senses and thought process. Whereas intelligence is all about the application of those skills. So it is also about accessing it and gaining that information, but more than that, it's about the application of. Can anybody tell me what the last two are? Yes, please.
I believe one was emotion.
Yes.
The other
Okay.
one was language.
We've got social emotional development and what we call self-help and adaptive skills. So social emotional development is defined, and sorry, I always forget this even though this is something I know very well, but social emotional development is all about, this is the exact definition, a child's ability to understand the feelings of others, to control their own feelings and behaviors, and to get along with their peers. That incorporates the social aspect and the emotional component. Then we've got our self-help and adaptive skills. Now, interestingly, I'd like to explain a little bit about this by telling you about a little story. I had a meeting with a mom for her child who was coming into our program, into our system. And she turned to me and she said, I don't understand why my son has a developmental delay. I mean, he can scroll my phone better than I can. So I kindly said to her, this is what we call an adaptive learned skill, which is a skill that is learned without being particularly taught that skill because it's a saturated skill that the child has adapted to in their environment. For instance, if a child was born on a farm and maybe from the time of birth, mom or dad strapped that baby to their chest and walked out and hand milked the cows, by the time that child is 2, they're going to be milking cows like a pro. So when we talk about that, it very much concerns me when I hear parents who say their child is so smart because they know how to navigate their phone. That's not a level of intelligence. It's not even cognition. It's a learned skill. And we need to decrease that in our society. It's very concerning to me, and I go into a lot about that, but I will tell you this. What I have seen in the field, and as a parent coach, is that the success rate for parents who take strategies in from parenting experts, tips and tricks, they take these things in, the success rate of those strategies to be implemented and provide actual change is very low when parents don't understand the why behind the behaviors. If you cannot understand the why, what's going on behind the scenes, what's happening in that child's development, you will never be able to effectively change those strategies. It's kind of like if you were navigating a boat on an ocean and you saw an iceberg sticking out and you said, oh, we've got to get around this iceberg, let's chop off the tip. And then you try to navigate around it and the bottom of your boat hits the other 90% of that iceberg that's below the ocean because you're not seeing beneath the surface. So I think that it is imperative that parents not only be provided with the foundational knowledge of human development, but it's my belief that we need to apply this as a part of our core curriculum in our education systems. The same way it is important to provide real-world financial components that children can start to apply in their life. You know, we tell them, you're going to need to know this later. You're going to need to know this later. Well, why not teach them now? So in my mind, if we teach people about human development, when they get to become a parent and they see something that's going on with their kid, they can say, oh, okay, that makes sense, that makes sense. And that's what's really important here. Because again, even if you don't have children, and believe me, I was almost there, I will say that it is really important because it also gives you a little bit of understanding of why other people are acting the way that they are. This is something we all need. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the next core lesson. Has anybody ever heard of the platinum rule? Does anybody know the platinum rule?
No.
Dr. Dower, do you know the platinum rule? What is it?
Treat others as they would like to be treated.
Yes. Yes, so this is a term that was coined by Tony Alessandro. And he coined this term because to my way of seeing it and what I started to understand was that it was all about empathy. When we apply the golden rule, do unto others as you would want done for yourself, it implies that what somebody else wants is exactly what I want, and vice versa. So let's say I love cats, and you love dogs. And so applying the golden rule, maybe you get me a dog for my birthday. And hey, listen, puppies are adorable. I do like dogs, but I really love cats. Well, if you were tapping into that platinum rule, you're thinking about what I want. And therefore, what are you gonna do? You're gonna give me a cat, yeah. So this is really important because this is all about empathy, and that leads us into recognizing that we need to put ourselves in their shoes. When we talk about our children, we need to lead with empathy for them too. Now, when a child is young, their brain development, it's, the amygdala, the limbic system, it's all about that. It's all about the emotional response mechanism. So if they're crying over a broken toy and you say, oh, it's not that big a deal, what are you doing? You're minimizing their emotional response in that moment. But if you get down and you make eye contact and you say, whoa, I'm so sorry, I know you love that toy. Now you're empathizing with them. You're giving them what they need. You're giving them that core component of human connection they must have in order to be able to process the emotions they're experiencing and keep moving forward. Now, the other piece to one of the keys to the building a strong parent-child relationship is all about autonomy. Can anybody tell me the difference between autonomy and independence? There's a difference, I promise. Oh, I love you.
Well, I think I would first define independence as doing things on your own, without regard for what's going on around you. But autonomy has the ability to take, make choices, take charge.
Choices. See, as parents, we think that it's our job, our responsibility to get our children to independent living. But the reality is that at some point, they're going to also want to make choices for themselves. In fact, they usually want to immediately. Once they start to walk, they want to walk everywhere, right? They're going to be making those choices for themselves. So what's really important is to counterbalance, of course, the knowledge that we have and the experience and wisdom we've gleaned from our experiences with their ability to make choices for themselves. So when they're young, it starts in increments, small increments, making choices on what they're going to wear, and so on. I had a client who said that her husband insisted her son wear a button-down shirt and pressed slacks to school. All he wanted to do was wear a pair of sweatpants. And the thing is that it's really important because it builds up a person's self-esteem when you can start to increase their choices, the choices they get to make for themselves. They may not lead the same life. They're not going to follow in your footsteps. And making the assumption that they will means that there's going to be disappointment on all sides. So we need to lead with empathy and autonomy. Those are the two keys to the parent-child relationship: empathy and autonomy. Now, next, I want to talk to you guys about the third lesson. And this one is something that I think very few parents provide for themselves. Have any of you ever seen a child having a meltdown in a store? Yeah? What I find very interesting and unique is that when that child is having a meltdown, and I've been there, I see people going over to the child. Are you okay, honey? I actually had this happen to me once. My baby was sitting in the cart and he started crying, and some woman walked over, brushed right past me, and she's like, oh, are you okay, honey? Are you okay, sweetie? Interestingly, nobody checks in with the parent.
Right.
Why? So I say that for parents to really provide themselves with the ability to deal with those stressful situations, they need to do an empathy check for themselves. I say this a lot. Parenting, I'm sorry, I was thinking about this. Have you heard that saying where when you're on a plane and the plane is going down, they say put your mask on first before turning to help the person next to you, right? Well, what I say a lot is like, parenting is a lot like the plane going down. But what I want to know is, do you know how to care for yourself in that moment before turning to help your child? And so I developed this system that I call the emotional stopgap mechanism. And what I believe we can do is strengthen our own emotional resilience in those heightened, stressful, and emotional moments with our children. Now, I'm not saying all parenting is heightened, is stressful and emotional, but a lot of it is, and it's usually because you're right up there on the forefront of the battleground. So when we engage what I call our emotional stopgap mechanism, we have a better ability to strengthen our emotional resilience in those stress-filled moments. So imagine this. Imagine there's a little valve inside your brain, and between the limbic system, which is all about the emotional responses, and the prefrontal cortex, which is all about your critical thinking and your rational decision making, you've got a little valve. And in a moment that's really stressful, you're able to do a quick check as your amygdala is shooting off. Your amygdala is the fire system of the neural system, right? It's the fire alarm of the neural system. So imagine turning that valve and just slowly decreasing the sound of the fire alarm, right? Like I wish we could have done before. And then checking in with yourself. So I want to tell you a story about what happened last year with my son. We were on our way to walking to school. He's 5 now, by the way. He thinks he's worldly. He thinks he's becoming an adult because he's getting one of his first adult teeth in. He's like, I'm gonna be an adult. It's wonderful. Not quite yet, honey. But one day we were walking to school and on the sidewalk, and he tripped. And as he tripped, one of his shoes went flying off and he stumbled. And of course, what happened next? The tears started. Oh. And he lowered himself to the ground and the tears began. And he looked up at me and he said, Mommy, this day is ruined. I think we should just go home. He's a smarty pants. And of course, what did I do? I looked at him, like, oh boy. And I checked with myself what was happening. Oh, the preschool doors are about to close. I'm gonna have to get him to the front doors. I started getting nervous and thrown off balance because now I was a little bit frustrated, like, oh, this is gonna throw off my entire workday. Oh no. And I checked with myself what was happening. I was also feeling a little self-conscious because people were walking by and they're like, what on earth is happening there? And you know, everybody's got an opinion. So what did I do? I sat down with him. I moved us off the sidewalk. I sat down with him. I said, let's check your foot. Let's see how it's doing. Oh, can you wiggle it? Wiggle? Okay, good. Great. How's it feel? And then I checked in with him. Oh. That looked like that hurt. That looked painful. Looked like it scared you a little bit. Yeah, Mommy. Yeah. Now here's the thing, honey. One of two things can happen right now. If we went home, like you asked, it'd be a pretty boring day for you. Unfortunately, I can't take a day off of work. So you're gonna have to keep yourself entertained, and it won't be a fun Mommy Connor play date. Be pretty boring. Now, Connor, what do you love to do in school? What are your favorite fun things that you can do in school? Oh, well, I like playing with my friends. I like playing on the playground. What else? I love drawing in my journal. Oh, great. Circle time, snack time. And soon he was telling me all about the fun he has at school. And now we've switched gears. And after a moment, he looked at me, he goes, Mommy, I think I'm ready to go to school now. And off we went.
Right.
What I didn't do was yell at him. What I didn't do was cajole him, threaten him, bribe him. I have seen that happen. I even saw two parents. Now, we have a really wide area by the playground right before the preschool doors. I saw two parents chasing their kid around to try to get him to the door, and then Dad picked him up, threw him over his shoulder, and he's kicking and screaming, and you gotta go to school, kiddo. But in the time it took them to do all that, that's what I went through. What I didn't know, this is a funny moment, as I was walking my way back up, I see the crossing guard. I didn't realize she had been observing us the entire time, and she looks at me and she goes, whew, that was some high stakes negotiation going on there. Yeah, it was. But it only took a few minutes. It may have felt like forever, but it only took a few minutes. So when we do this, when we engage our emotional stopgap mechanism for ourselves, because usually people aren't giving us, the parents, an emotional, empathy check. They're usually gearing in on the kid. In fact, I had somebody once say to me, like, it's so annoying when kids scream on an airplane. Like, why can't the parents just get them to stop? Don't they know it's annoying everybody around them? How annoying is it for you, the parent? You're not just feeling frustrated and annoyed. You're at the end of your tether. You're stressed. You're embarrassed. You're feeling all these emotions, and nobody's checking in with you. So we give ourselves the ability to do this, we'll have a greater ability to engage with our children the right way instead of the emotionally charged way. Oh, I went off script here now, guys. Hold on one second. Let's see. Okay. So the last thing that I'd like to talk to you guys about, this is probably the hardest part. This is something not a lot of parents want to talk about. This is something not a lot of human beings want to talk about. I ask parents this question all the time. What is the one thing that you want to know as a parent before you leave this planet, this world? Without fail, I get some variation on, I want to know my kids and my loved ones will be okay without me. All right then, we have to start with the end in mind. I have seen over the course of many, many years, so many parents trying desperately to protect their children at all costs, to keep them sheltered from pain and sorrows and loss. I'm going to tell you this. The best lessons I ever learned were in the moments of deepest grief. My parents, now I could go on and on about the amount of losses I've experienced, but I'm just going to talk about my parents right now. My parents had two very unique journeys with loss, with cancer. My father's was a 10-year struggle, in and out of remission. In some ways, we got used to his illness. We didn't want to, but his illness became a part of the fabric of our lives. So when the cancer metastasized to his bones, it took me a bit to be okay, to realize this was the beginning of the end. I started trying to work at the same time as becoming his primary caregiver. And then I realized I couldn't do that anymore. So I took full leave, and I was his primary caregiver. It was not an easy journey. It was not something that I would have ever imagined was that kind of experience until I was in it. But my father was a very unique man, and he was a Holocaust survivor. And so he always had a story to tell. And I realized that this story, his story, was also going to be a part of my story. And going from being a Holocaust survivor to dying peacefully in the house that I grew up in, with me caring for him until he took his last breath, was an honor for me. at the same time as it was one of the most painful experiences I had ever had. I don't tell you this to negate the pain of the experiences. I think it's really important to feel those emotions. And honestly, emotions, a lot of psychologists will tell you they're neither good nor bad, they just are what they are. So we don't always get a choice in what happens to us. Sometimes we don't even get a choice in how we feel about it, but we can choose how we respond to it and how we want to view it and how we want to take that into our lives. Now my mother's was a 2-year journey where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. In fact, one of the first times one of her doctors said, "This is so unexpected." My mother's response, "Well, nobody ever expected the Spanish Inquisition." My mom had a humor. It was a lot of times very dark, but it helped. And the fact that she was able to sustain her humor in the face of impossible odds was a testament to her emotional resilience. And it is something that I believe is imperative if we are going to live in a world where we understand firmly, with full resolution, that life isn't just precious, it's finite. So we need to start with the end in mind. And that will help us raise our children to being okay without us. I'd like to leave you with this last old saying. We prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. Thank you.
Is it lunch? Is it lunch?
Oh, yeah.
I just realized I didn't ask if anybody had any questions for me. If anybody does while we're waiting. Yeah.
I just had a comment.
Sure.
I loved your story about how you dealt with that interaction with your son, because it reminds me of when I was raising my children. I did not have the emotional reserve at all because I was frazzled. And my answer to everything was, "It's not broken. You're not dead."
Right?
Which your technique is way better than that.
It's true though, and I will say that it is something that I see happen a lot when a parent says, "You're fine," not realizing, because we know they're fine. And we'll get them there too eventually. That's the thing. It's really important that we get them there. So it's not just about the empathy, but it's also about building in coping mechanisms and strategies. I didn't really talk to you guys about that, but that's something we do with our son a lot. In fact, I'll talk about that tomorrow, because that's a really vital component to this. We can't just empathize with them. We also have to help them find coping mechanisms and strategies that work for them. And again, applying the platinum rule means that, hey, if breathing techniques work for me and yoga works for me, it still might not work for my son. So that's really important, to do a lot of trial and error. And honestly, we learn best from our mistakes. I mean, there's a reason why they say hindsight is 20/20. It's because you have experienced something and now you can look back on that experience and say, oh, okay, now I get it. But that's a really big component to raising a child, is not just like giving them free rein to explode their emotions, but also teaching them those coping mechanisms. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Also a comment, because what I realize is how tied in time is. When you feel rushed, let's go. And when you allow yourself to realize like you exaggerated, like, oh, I'm going to be late for work, like that's such a big deal that I would be 4 minutes late for work or something. And my own little fall was when I was a camp counselor for the first time with 3 and 4-year-olds, and we had the nurse's place was, you'd have to go all the way out here and then all the way to the front desk, and maybe it was even twice as long. And so when a little girl fell and skinned her knee, and it was, red, she limped
the whole way there. And we had, I mean, it was maybe a 5-minute walk because she was going so slowly. And so I had a lot of perspective to think of things, and she's gonna take care of you, and we'll go figure it out. And then on the way back, it was such a long walk, she started with saying, I think I'm gonna call my mom to go home. And then by the time we got to the playground, she ran off to the others. So time is also a big factor that made me think of all of that. And
Absolutely.
a couple minutes is not a lot of time.
It's not. It's not. Yeah. When your kid is lying on the grocery store, on the floor in the grocery store, because this happened to me, having a complete meltdown, and you're like, oh, and he's screaming and he's kicking, and I'm just like, ah. And of course, like, your fire alarm's going off, and you're like, I just need to get him out of here. This is embarrassing. This is hard. This is difficult. This is, I don't have the energy for this. Of course, we all have our things. But when we really look at it in the broader scope of it, we can check ourselves and say, okay, the way I respond here in this moment is going to matter. So often we all look back on our childhoods and we're like, oh, I wish my parents had done things differently, right? Me too. The thing is that if we think about that, so the same thing is true for our kids. Wouldn't it be better to be more present with them in that moment and create a ripple effect that is better lasting instead of just get through it and get over it?
Yarona, I'd just like to share something because it builds on your story, Laura, and it ties in, and because we've all, for those of us who have children, we know what it's like to go to Toys R Us. Where they want everything, And so it ties into what you said, having the end in mind. So what I learned, and I have a child development background, and I'm raising my kids too, is that we would have a conversation in the car before we go into Toys R Us and say, okay, we're here to buy a gift for Johnny. And so let's keep focused. So what are some ideas we have to buy this gift for Johnny? And so that's our end goal in mind. And so I know you're going to see a lot of things that you're going to want, and I learned this too because my son was like, in the moment he had to have that, and then a minute later it was something else, And so we redirect and keep it in mind, because if we don't keep that in mind, guess what? We're leaving the store, you won't have a gift, and how do you feel going to the party then? And so it was like, oh, that bigger picture,
Yep. I love that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much.